if the Pentecost story is just about hearing our language spoken, our own language, the one that we know, the one that we understand, if that's what it's about alone, then what we would have to conclude would be that inclusion means being near each other, but remaining separate from one another, right? But we understand that the kingdom of God is one that is always expanding, right? We see this throughout the Old Testament when Israel is consistently challenged and commanded to welcome the foreigner as one of their own. We see it in the gospel accounts as Jesus teaches and ministers to not just Jews, but Gentiles too, the ones at the margins. And we see it in the letters to the early church as they struggled to understand and keep in step with the Spirit. There's more room. There is more room. There's always more room. The kingdom is not just for you. The story of Pentecost is not just about hearing our own language spoken, but it's hearing the language of another. And even more than that, it's learning to speak the language of another. To learn another person's language is to enter into their life, their identity, their culture, their perspective, and it's to allow yourself to change because of it. Again, Dr. Jennings writes that Pentecost challenges the church to remember that if language allows us to enter the world of another, then the speaking of another's language signifies a life that is lived in submersion and in submission to somebody else's cultural realities. Submersion and submission to somebody else's cultural realities. This is how God chose to pour out the Spirit. This is how God chose to give the gift of the Spirit. And this is the foundation of the early church, lest we forget. Remember the end of Acts 2 that we read a couple weeks ago? It happens after Pentecost. So at the beginning of Acts 2, the Spirit shows up, enables those present to hear and speak their own languages and the languages of others. They're all super confused. Some are even very skeptical. So then Peter stands up. Peter proclaims the gospel. He tells the crowd who Jesus is, and he tells the crowd that what they're experiencing is the work of the Spirit. And then people respond by repenting and devoting themselves to this new Jesus community. This is Acts chapter 2, verse 41. So those who welcomed this message were baptized, and that day about 3,000 persons were added. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers, and awe came upon everyone because many signs and wonders were being done through the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at their home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God, having the goodwill of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. This is like the Acts 2 church, right? We hold this up as the model. This is what it could be. This is how it began. The Acts 2 church is a response to the Spirit, and it's founded upon not just diversity, but inclusion. We see that in Pentecost. And this is the foundation for our understanding of inclusive welcome as a church. Just as the early church did, we follow the Spirit who works in and through our lives and through the lives of those around us, not in spite of, but particularly through and in the differences between us. And we believe that just as the Spirit activated the early church through inclusion, that we are called to be a community marked by inclusive welcome too.